First of all, I want to thank you guys for taking time out. You guys have been here for a couple of days now. And just to make it here, I'm sure you're putting so many things on hold, both at work and home, so really appreciate that. So last year when I was up here on stage, we spent time talking about what our lessons learned were, right? We talked about how did we apply GenAI into the enterprise, into the large enterprise. And we had learned a few lessons. And so this year, we're going to talk about, well, it's great that they got adopted, but did they actually make money? And has it already passed the stage of, from pilot to profit, right? So a few years ago, a company that is a top 10 automaker in the world, they reached out to us, and they had a specific problem. They had an aging population that was working on the manufacturing line, okay? And these were folks that were responsible for maintaining the equipment that was on the line. So on the manufacturing line, you've got all types of equipment from, putting the chassis together to assembly, to paint, to finishing and things like that. And these guys were the ones that were keeping that machine up and running. So the criticality of this problem was that anytime a machine is down, the entire line comes to a stop. That means nothing is going out the other end, which means they're not making money, okay? So the problem statement was that the population was aging and the next generation was not ready to come and take those jobs because they were in very difficult environments, very stressful, and they just weren't into it. And so the idea was, is there a way to leverage GenAI to learn from the service manuals, learn how these machines need to be maintained, and then have a system that can help these new employees that come on to be able to very quickly maintain these machinery. And so it seemed like a fairly straightforward problem. Our teams got these manuals, stacked them all up, loaded into these systems, and built a very successful pilot. In fact, the answers that were coming out of this pilot were not only on par with the manuals, but they were able to collect information across different manuals and then give a very reasonable answer. So the teams were pretty proud of what they had done, except that once it was deployed, the same experts who helped get those service manuals came back and said, this doesn't work. Now, you expect that typically from somebody from a different part of the organization, but not from the same team that helped you build it. And so this resulted in pilot paralysis. So you got to the pilot, you're happy with your pilot, and your happiness ends there, right? And you can never get out of that state. So let's see why. Let's see what happened here. Well, this pilot, it ran for 6 months. And during that period, this is sort of what the cost chart looked like. So there was an initial cost of the initial data prep and labor. There was some maintenance of maintaining the stack as well as the API connections, and then a certain amount of savings that they were able to achieve by not having to have the same level of experienced folks on the line. When you look at the ROI curve, though, even with a 36-month wait time, it wasn't going to cut it. So it was reinforcing the fact that, well, something is not right here. Why is it not making a difference? And so you remember it was the same experts that said it was. And so we reached out to those experts and asked them, okay, what is it about these answers that doesn't work? And they told us, well, the answers that your system is giving, they're theoretically fine, but we have much quicker, faster ways of solving this. Like, okay, well, where's that information? oh, that information's not recorded. But we do have incident reports. So whenever something goes down, they had an incident report, which had nothing to do with the service manuals. And the incident reports, to be able to complete them, they had to put a line or two that said what they did. We said, okay, let's go find those incident reports. We loaded up 10,000, there was 10,000 incident reports, and they were not standardized. There was each person that was filling them out the way they wanted to fill it out. But all of that was taken and loaded into the same system now. But as you can imagine now, what's going to happen? They already told us that the answers were wrong from the other system. So just because you bring in more data doesn't solve that problem. What we saw at this point was the data that was trained on the service manuals had one answer, theoretical, great answer if you had a lot of time, and the incident reports had a different answer that was a quick and dirty, hey, get it up and running very quickly. So in order to make that work, some of you must have already seen the sessions earlier today, and I think there's one coming up next on agentic systems. And so leveraging agents where you have one agent that's the theoretical expert and another agent that's the practical expert, and let them duke it out. And then say, okay, whichever one is more valuable in this short period of time, take that action and then keep track of it so that you can take the theoretical action as you need. With that change, we started to see that for an additional 3 months is how long it took to do that. But with that change, we started to see, first of all, that the initial cost now significantly increased because of the additional data prep. There's a lot of time that had to go on and a lot of money that was spent in the data prep of this unstructured, non-standard new content. Labor that was involved in it as well. So now your initial cost is much higher. Your maintenance cost was slightly higher because now you just have a higher token size to deal with. But right away, you are now starting to see all those savings that you initially were promising and you thought you were going to get. Now you're starting to see it get unleashed. The ROI now you're able to see that, hey, it is starting to cross with a break-even of approximately 14 months. Now, the details of how many months and how much money, this is going to vary by project size. But you get to profit. The point, though, is there was a hidden lever here. There was a hidden lever that we missed, that we then realized, and that hidden lever is you need to look for these adoption triggers. Just because the answer looks right doesn't mean it will get adopted. And you need adoption by the actual folks that were feeding you the content before you're able to even start to see revenue or profit. So in this case, 2 adoption triggers. Number 1 was to get the experts on board and get their content in. The second is when we connected with those incident reports, we didn't just connect it to the reports, we connected it to the reporting system. So the fact that they didn't have to do anything specific to try to get their incident reports from the way it was into the system was an additional adoption trigger. So you want to look for these adoption triggers to be able to get past that pilot phase, right? Now, with this lever in hand, now that we had this lever, in our next project, we said, you know what, give us all the data you can get, right? We're not going to make that mistake again. So let's just go ahead and get all the data. So this is a company, second company here we're going to talk about. This is a company that builds these entertainment devices on planes. So, whenever you're traveling, you have these devices that you could, watch something on probably. It's sometimes frustrating when you go sit there, you get yourself set up, plugged in and all of that, and then you realize that thing doesn't work. Yeah. So that's exactly what this company wanted to avoid. They build these devices, they supply these devices to almost all airlines in the world. And they maintain and manage these devices. So they were getting complaints from passengers saying that, the rates of your failed devices is too high, and so it was starting to affect their business. By the way, these guys are a $25 billion business per year, and they were actually identified as one of the top 50 most innovative companies. So innovation wasn't new to them, yeah? But they really wanted to get ahead of these devices, so we said, okay, well, what can we do about it? Some of you may already know this, but whenever a plane lands in an airport, right away, while all the other processes start, there's a huge data transfer process going on. On average, somewhere between 800 gigs to a terabyte worth of data, all right? Now, that includes a lot of data, sensors, every single ping, every single pressure gauge and temperature gauge, but it also includes these entertainment devices. So every single click, every volume change, every selection, every reboot, all of these are tracked in logs. And so our team said, all right, maybe we could start with a pilot where we have these logs that are being loaded and processed through the system that can look for some sort of pattern of deviation and then catch it before it fails. If you're able to catch it before it fails, then you might be able to take some action on it. And a lot of times what these guys would do is they wouldn't waste their time repairing some of these things. So what they would do is they would just swap it out right when the plane is in for repairs, right? And these are typically very quick to swap out, and so they would actually be able to get their SLAs back higher again. And as you can imagine that, the finance team in this case came back and said, this is not going to scale. We had done this for a slice of approximately 20 different types of aircrafts. And so we were fairly, solid on the fact that, look, we're able to process all these logs. It's working fine. But as we ended up in pilot paralysis now, because we didn't know what else to do. But if we look at what actually happened in the pilot, this took us about 5 months to go through this process with a cost that, there's a lower initial cost this time. This time, so it was somewhere around the 200K range, because the logs were already came well defined and well prepared. We didn't have to do much data prep. But the maintenance cost was high. We were starting to see the savings though. And so in this case, the ROI was reaching a break-even point, but not good enough for it to be worth actually running this as a project. And so what we realized what was happening was that these logs, you have an individual log file, a zipped file for every seat on every aircraft, on every log of every flight. And so when you take that from 15 to 20 aircraft to the 10,000, for example, flights that American Airlines, for example, flies per day, that adds up very quickly. And so what we thought was an acceptable maintenance cost there would not be acceptable when you scale up, yeah? And so what we did was we went back to the drawing board, and this is where you really need a multifunctional team, yeah? So we took the logs and then leveraged log analysis tools, your tool of choice, Splunk, Elk, whatever is already out there, first to detect patterns of deviation on a time series basis. And then once you detect that, and you know that there's these devices on these seats on these aircrafts, take that as your context window and then pass only that and those logs for those dates on those seats into your GenAI system. Now this might seem like an of course, why wouldn't you do that? Yeah, I would know the answer to that. I probably should have thought of it myself, but it just so happened that we were so excited about doing this and passing everything through the GenAI tool just because it could do it, right? It was able to very fast, very quickly solve that. So getting the context window and then having a multi-tiered query process that just pass that in and then now read through the logs to detect why did that happen? Not the fact that it was going to happen, but why did that happen? And is there something that could be done? Is it a device problem? Or is it a wiring problem? Is it an aircraft issue? What if you go ahead and swap that out and it didn't really make a difference because it was a wiring problem? And so being able to detect why that might be happening is where we leverage GenAI as opposed to leveraging GenAI to tell us that it was going to happen. Yeah? So with that, this doubled the time that it took for us to do the project. But in this case, the initial cost was not very much because the cost, as you know, of these log analysis tools has been there. They're already pretty commoditized. You can easily get access to these tools. Spend a little bit more time on that, but the maintenance cost reduced significantly. Now, because there was a lot of token bloat previously, now we're able to really shrink that and say we're only using GenAI where we have to. The savings was about the same. We weren't really seeing much value in savings, but the reason now that the ROI was a lot better was because we brought that maintenance cost so much. The maintenance cost is on an ongoing basis, right? It's an OpEx. And so anything you bring that down to really helps you with making your ROI go up. This took a longer time to break even just because of that scale. Fortunately, they were patient with us, got it to profit. But again, what was that hidden lever here? Last time it was adoption triggers. What's the hidden lever here? In this case, you really want to make your workflows really lean. That means use GenAI only where you have to. And append that with any type of pre-processing you can do or post-processing you can do, and then leverage classical AI where you can. Yes, GenAI can solve some of those, but why would you do that? And so making sure that your workflow is lean. But you know what was an interesting additional value that we found there? After we ran this a few iterations, we detected certain patterns and then said, you know what, we don't even need to use, even though we could use GenAI for this, we could now detect these patterns and codify those patterns straight up into the logs. And then say, look, this pattern of deviant behavior, we've seen this before multiple times, and we have a good idea why this is happening. We don't even have to pass that in. So over time, we were sending less and less and less to the GenAI on the back end, and as a result of that, close to, I believe it was somewhere in the 5 to 7% of the logs were all that really needed to be sent over time. So this is where you get your workflows really lean, and now you're able to see a quicker ROI. So we had these two major levers, right? We had the lever of adoption triggers and this lever of lean workflows. And now we thought, all right, you know what? We've gotten past the adoption problem. We really got our costs down. What could go wrong? We're really ready to knock this out of the park with our next project. And this was with a telco company that's in Asia. They have approximately 40% market share in the country, but the bigger player in that country, these guys really wanted to get some more market share. They really wanted to grow, and they were excited. Actually, last week I was visiting them, and they had their quarterly earnings report, and they had an EBITDA of close to 50% year-over-year growth, higher than they had ever had in the last 3 years. Great place to be, all right? And they're all excited about growing. They want to grow really fast. But what they found out was while they wanted to grow really fast, their customers weren't there yet. So what these guys sell is they sell mobile plans, they sell network services, they sell migration to or automation tools, things like that. But their users, these were small and medium businesses. So for example, somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm opening up a new coffee shop. It's going to be in this part of town. I know I need phone services, but what else do I need? What type of network services do I need? And so they would spend a lot of time trying to convince these people what they need to buy, even though they had a huge marketplace. So the people that were coming in, they just didn't know what to buy. They didn't know what went with what. Yeah? So this seemed like a good opportunity to build the lightest weight chatbot that you need. Go look at their services, find out what they have, what are the relationships between them, and then have a conversation with them and navigate them to the subset that they needed, right? Great. And in fact, this was even deployed for one of their regions. And very soon we heard back from the sales team and the CEOs, the staff, that says, this doesn't help. Now, this ends up in pilot paralysis again. But when somebody says this doesn't help, that's a nice way of saying, so what? Great, you went and built a chatbot. All right, so now you're having greater engagement. What difference does it make? And so, as we looked into the pilot, it was doing everything we wanted it to do. In fact, it was even generating combinations that the salespeople couldn't think of. But when they looked at, so this took a couple of months, when they looked at the costs were yes, it takes, in this case, it took close to $400K of initial costs because we had to connect with their services systems, but it wasn't a difficult problem. Maintenance cost was low because we weren't really sending so much back and forth. A lot of this was happening on the client side. But the savings were nothing compared to what we thought it was going to be. And this was the most terrible ROI we'd ever seen. We didn't even want to show this to someone. Basically, every dollar we put in, we're never seeing it again. Yeah? So in this case, we had to go. First, we talked to the sales team, didn't understand what was going on. We talked to the executive team, they didn't know what was going on. They just said it's not working, right? This is no benefit here. Until we actually were able to speak to some of the customers. And we found out that what they were doing? They would come to the site, have this long conversation, figure out exactly what they wanted, and then go to the competitor and buy everything from them. So not only were we educating the customer, we were also sending them to our competitor and giving away our own market share, which is why the CEO had a lot of very nice words to tell us. And so, but right away, we had to fix this problem fast. We didn't have a lot of time. So what we did was very quickly appended another bot side by side with the conversational bot. While the conversation was going on, it would very quickly configure a deployable solution. So for example, the coffee shop that was being started and the conversation goes and says, well, do you have a POS system? You're going to need a POS system on day one before you start your shop. Okay. How are you going to do your CRM? Do you have something to track your customers? And the moment they said yes to any of those, it would automatically reconfigure like an Odoo template or something like that on the back end, infrastructure as code, so that right when they're at the end of that conversation, they have a button to deploy right away. So you capture that sale before they leave the site. And you really reduce that quote to cash. So the moment we put that in, of course you can't do this for everything, right? You can't do this for, if you have to go and install network cables at somebody's shop, that can't be done online. But you know what we did? We did the scheduling of that event online. So the moment they said, all right, well, when can we come to your shop? And I said, well, I might be there between 5 and 6 on Saturday. All right, we'll send a couple of technicians, towards the end of that hour. Great. Now they're locked in. So capturing that sale there really made a difference. And what we noticed was that, yes, there was an initial cost now because we had to go do template definition, configure them. What is it that you can actually tweak on a template? You don't want to ask a question and then tell them, oh, sorry, well, I know you wanted this, but I can't give it to you. Yeah. So you have to guide them to certain things. And we noticed that this is where we've really started capturing all of that market share that we wanted to capture to begin with. And in this case, this was one of the few cases where we were really able to, get that ROI out. Now we're currently at about 24 months, but we've already regained all the money that we put in and on trajectory to do a lot more. A shorter break even than we thought. Now, in this case, what was the toggle? What was that hidden lever? So we got our adoption triggers out of the way. We got our lean workflows out of the way. But what you want to look for is you want to look for revenue accelerators. What is it that can really push your revenue out into the future? So in this case, number one was, while the conversation was going on, we wanted to capture the sale. Okay, good. But if you're anyway having the conversation with them, that's a great chance to upsell and cross-sell, right? Hey, you know what? If you're getting network services anyway, and you're a coffee shop, don't you expect a lot of your customers to come in and sit there for hours, use up your Wi-Fi like I do? Well, then don't you want to make sure that you have enough bandwidth for that? You don't want them leaving because they can't get their work done. So now you sell them additional bandwidth services. Oh, wait a minute. Now that if you have higher bandwidth services, you want to make sure nobody comes in and starts messing with, planting a virus somewhere in your network. Oh, so you need cybersecurity now. All right. So now throw some of those in there. That's the opportunity. That's where your per customer revenue really goes high. So those are revenue accelerators. One is you capture the sale, then you do your upsell and cross-sell. And in some cases, let's say that you're not selling it, all right? They're just not buying it. Well, you can then now offer discounts dynamically, right? You know what your competitors are selling that stuff for. I'm gonna throw them in a 5 or 10% discount to just keep them in the sale. You can do all of that dynamically, right? So capturing these levers, with this third lever, we really started to see that it's pushing the revenue in the direction we wanted, yeah? But does that mean that every project ends up in profit? There's just one project that came to us. It was a HR team that came and said, you know what, we're sick and tired of answering these HR questions from our employees. They keep coming and asking the exact same questions over and over, and it doesn't matter how many events we have or we talk to them about this stuff, they keep coming back with the same things. Can you guys just take this content and create a little conversational tool that they could have it on our behalf? Yeah, I can see some of you kind of already knowing where this is gonna go, right? Yeah, well, in hindsight, we should have just said no. But when we built it, after we saw the usage, we're tracking what type of questions are coming. We're looking at the usage logs. And all the users, they didn't care about what HR wanted to say. They were all interested in their own career paths and when they were going to get their next promotion, right? And the way we had designed the bot was to be low on temperature so that we wouldn't, give high expectations to somebody about getting anything other than, hey, out of the checklist, you've done these things and you haven't done these, so I don't think you're ready. They didn't want to hear that, yeah? So needless to say, yeah, you should learn to say no when the time is right and just walk away. But overall, what you'll see from these three examples is, in addition to the levers, there's a few requests that came in before this session to say, give us some ranges of how much this costs and how much money there is really to make. And that's a very dodgy question and something we really want to stay away from, but I wanted to give you guys a range. So on average, what you've seen in the last three examples is, you can expect to spend somewhere between, a couple of $100K to maybe up to $1 million. And, you really shouldn't go beyond that for your pilots. Now, you might say that's already a lot, but hey, that's what it takes if you have a good enough team. You're going to need, in addition to prompt designers and prompt engineers, you're also going to need infrastructure folks. You're going to need people who scale. You're going to need people who know how to do DevOps. You're going to need people who are TPMs who are able to embed this inside the existing businesses and all of that. So it does take somewhere between $200 to $1 million, and give yourself at least 3 to 6 months to go do that work, right? Now that you know the levers, hopefully it wouldn't take you double the time that it took us. So you should be able to shrink that, but that's on average how much it costs and how long it takes. Now, I've also read all the Gartner reports, and I love them, their estimates are typically, you should see ROI in less than a year. I haven't seen ROI in less than a year. I mean, if you don't fall in one of these spots, you're probably going to figure something else out. So set expectations accordingly. You know, expect something in the 15 to 18 month range to be safe. And hey, if you get it within 12 months, great. Yeah. So it's not easy to get to profit as much as people talk about it, right? It's not easy to get to profit, but you know, it's like a maze that you're walking through. You know, as you're walking through this maze, you're looking for profit. There's a couple of things that I keep telling my teams. You know, you have to have patience the entire time. It's not going to happen very quickly. And secondly, you have to have empathy. Empathy for who? Empathy for the users who have to use the systems you're building. It's not easy for them to use a system that they feel is going to take over their jobs. Even though it doesn't matter how many times you tell them it's not going to take over your job, you can't take that feeling away. So when you walk in their shoes for a bit and say, what is it like to have to use one of these systems? It gives you a real feel for how you're going to get the profit. You also have to have empathy for the operators of these systems. It's easy for us to build it and have somebody else run it. But these systems vary a lot on the back end. There's so many things changing. Every week there's a new library. I know when I come to these sessions, usually every session it's like, oh, I didn't know that existed. I didn't know this existed. I feel dumber than I did when I came in, right? But it's never ending. So feel for those teams. They have to try to stay up to date. They have to keep patching this up. They have to keep, and every time somebody else comes to them and says, why aren't you using this? They're like, well, yeah, maybe I should be using that. And so have some empathy for them. They need to run the stuff that you're building. And finally, you also have to have some empathy for the investors of these things, right? I mean, the leaders that are having to invest their money, their company's money, and they have to have very tough board meetings. They have to have meetings that say, hey, you're going to spend close to $1 million in the next 2 months, 3 months. How soon are we going to see it back? They need some kind of confidence to be able to go have those discussions. So have some empathy. And it's easy for us to say, well, it's an investment into the future, and if you don't invest in it now, you're not going to survive. Well, yeah, but they have to have, I mean, who's going to have that conversation? They have to have it, right? So with patience and empathy, you know, there's always a path to profit. With that, I'll wrap that up. Thank you very much.